All right, let's start with a summary of what happened. On the morning of May 11th, 2013, we're in a quiet, rural part of Tainan, Taiwan. A local couple is just out taking their dog for a walk through some fields and orchards. But that quiet morning was about to take a really dark turn.
So their dog, whose name was Bale, which actually translates to fatty, comes trotting back from the fields carrying something. It's a bone, and it still has bits of flesh on it. At first, the owner just thinks, oh, it's probably an animal bone, and tosses it away. But the dog, Bale, just wouldn't let it go. He went right back, picked it up, and brought it back again.
When he took a closer look, the owner realized this wasn't an animal bone. It looked human. He calls the police immediately. They show up, and sure enough, forensic experts confirm it's a human right forearm. A quick search of the area then turns up a matching left forearm, maybe 15 meters away.
Okay, so now the police kick off a much wider search, bringing in more people, expanding the grid. They're trying to find anything else that could help them identify a victim, but they hit a dead end fast. They even drained a pond nearby, but that didn't turn up anything either.
And just like that, the case goes cold for 2 whole days. And then, on May 13th, believe it or not, it's the same dog, Bale, that makes the next big discovery. During another walk, he's drawn to this foul smell coming from a thicket of bushes, about 200 meters from where they found the first arm. A moment later, he comes out dragging this white plastic bag. Police open it up, and inside, they find a human head, wrapped up in 3 layers of plastic and a pillowcase. And that's where the initial discovery phase ends.
So now we can start to piece together the bigger picture here. You see, this wasn't just some random local crime. This was really the tragic end of a story that started thousands of miles away. It's a story about the search for a better life, and it's centered on 2 migrant workers from Vietnam, a married couple named Le Thi Dieu and Phung Minh Hoai. Just like so many others, they'd come to Taiwan dreaming of earning enough money to build a real future back home.
But chasing that dream, it came with a huge price tag. To even get their jobs, they had to borrow $13,500 just to pay the broker fees. And that created this just crushing financial pressure from the second they landed. This debt wasn't just a number on a page, it was a constant, heavy weight on their shoulders. It was like this silent third person in their marriage, shaping every single decision they made.
And the reality of life in Taiwan? It was nothing like what they'd hoped for. Instead of being a team, they were split up, sent to factories in totally different cities, hundreds of kilometers from each other. They were working long, hard hours, and with the weight of that debt hanging over them, the physical distance started to become an emotional one too. It was like this chasm opening up between them, made wider by loneliness and just pure exhaustion.
Okay, to really get what happens next, you have to understand the 2 very different worlds they were living in. Their lives in Taiwan just went in completely different directions. Hoai, the husband, he ends up at a foam factory in Tainan. And by all accounts, he was a hard worker. He kind of settled in, found a community with other guys from back home. But Zio, his wife, she had a much harder time. She struggled at her job in a food processing plant, and after only 6 months, she just couldn't take it anymore, so she ran. She left her legal job and became an undocumented worker in the massive city of Taipei.
So in Taipei, Dio gets a job at a restaurant. And it's there that she starts a relationship with one of the chefs, a man named Chu Van Quang. She was basically living a whole new life, completely separate from the one she'd planned with her husband. And all the while, Hoai, who was still traveling for hours every single month to see her and give her money, he had no idea. For a while, that was their new reality. 2 separate lives, held together only by a shared debt and a big secret.
But you know, secrets like this, they don't stay secret forever. In early 2013, Hoai started to get suspicious. He finds out his wife has a second phone, a gift from some other man. He confronts her, he looks at the phone records, and eventually the truth comes out. He confirms the affair. The foundation they'd built their whole dream on had just crumbled, and the tension that had been building for months started to escalate fast.
Okay, so let's jump back to the police investigation in the present. And they were facing some huge problems. The remains were just too decomposed for anyone to visually identify. And because the victim's fingertips were missing, probably destroyed by animals, they couldn't get any fingerprints. Basically, they had a body, but they had no idea who she was.
So with no face and no fingerprints, how could they even begin to find her name?
Yeah, they had to go purely on forensics. They put together a very specific profile. A woman, probably between 20 and 45, with long, curled, dyed brown hair, but she also had some really unique dental features, a crooked front tooth, and another one that actually grew inward. The investigators also noticed a high piercing on her ear, which they thought might mean she was a foreigner, since it could be a cultural thing.
So with this profile, the police put out a public notice.
For weeks, nothing. The calls they got just led nowhere. And then a call comes in from a man in Taipei. It's the chef, Chu Van Quang. He'd seen the notice and the description sounded way too familiar. But the detail that really got to him, the thing that sent a chill down his spine, was the pillowcase found with the head. He recognized it. It was one he had given his girlfriend, Lei Tjiu, who he said had been missing since April 23rd.
Okay, so with this new lead, the police get their hands on a photo of Dieu, and her smile in the picture shows the exact same crooked teeth from the forensic report. To be absolutely sure, they get DNA samples from her mother and her daughter back in Vietnam. It's a match. The victim is Lei Dieu, and right away the investigation locks onto her husband Phung Hoai, whose factory dorm was literally right next to the field where his wife's remains were found.
But was there any physical evidence linking her husband to the crime?
They found two really key pieces of evidence. First, the black plastic bag the head was wrapped in, it was a custom size, 65 by 62 centimeters. You couldn't just buy it in a store. Turns out it was made specifically for the foam factory where Hoai worked. Second, a torn rice sack found near the head was a cheap brand that Hoai and his roommates were known to buy in bulk. So the evidence was circumstantial, sure, but it was pointing right at him.
So on October 7th, the police arrest him. But get this, he is totally calm. No surprise, no fear, he just denies everything. Claims he hasn't seen his wife in ages. The interrogation was incredibly difficult. They needed a translator, which just watered down the pressure of the questioning. Any tough question, he just shuts down, says, "I don't know," or "I don't understand."
So what finally made him confess?
It all came down to the 11th interrogation. The police just lay everything out on the table in front of him. The plastic bag, the rice sack, the pillowcase. They point out that his wife's cell phone was found in his room and that its signal tracked from Taipei to his dorm right after she vanished. You could see he was starting to crack. And then one of the officers just changes his tone, gets real soft, and says something like, "You really did love your wife, didn't you? I mean, she's the mother of your child." And that was it. The mention of his daughter in Vietnam, he just completely broke down, sobbing, and confessed.
And then the whole story just poured out of him. He told him how he'd caught Dieu with her lover in a park. The huge argument they had later that night in the apartment her lover was renting for her. She demanded a divorce, she taunted him about not being able to provide for their daughter, and in a blind rage, he strangled her. Then, he dismembered her body, packed up the remains, and took a 300-kilometer taxi ride all the way from Taipei back to Tainan to get rid of them.
And so, that brings us to the end of this story. It's a story that started with so much hope for a better life, but it just buckled and collapsed under the weight of debt and distance and betrayal. It all ended with a brutal act, one that fulfilled this dark, twisted promise they'd once made to each other, almost as a joke. He had told her, "If you cheat on me, I'll cut you into 3 pieces.
But even with the confession, the case isn't completely closed. Hoai told them he threw his wife's upper torso into a big drainage canal, but it was supposedly swept away by a typhoon and was never found. And you're left with this just chilling image of Hoai going to work at the factory every single day, sleeping just a few meters away from the field where he'd hidden parts of his wife's body.
In the end, Phung Hoai was sentenced to 18 years in prison. After he serves his time, he'll be deported back to Vietnam. So the story has a verdict, but it leaves you with this unresolved feeling. It's a stark reminder of how desperation can curdle hope, how thin that line between love and possession really is, and how quickly a husband and a father can become a killer when his entire world falls apart.